So it's been almost 3 years ever since the original Is It Metal or Is It Rock video, and it's one that generated a lot of talk. And why wouldn't it? In many stores that sell music, there are tons of debates that go on between whether or not something deserves to be in the rock section or whether or not it's something that belongs in the metal section. Now, as time has progressed, what has ended up happening has been a gradual appropriation of all things from heavy metal in the rock sections to try to make some sort of unity. And it really doesn't make a lot of sense, and really if my customers, well, my former customers were any indication, it only served to piss people off, because now they had to dig through even more just to get to the same things that they were able to find in one place before. But within that video, we talked about a lot of bands and whether or not they deserve to be in rock or the metal sections. And would you believe that there are a ton more? Well, let's get started. Let's talk about a couple more bands and whether or not they should be in heavy metal or in the rock section. And the very first one, Guns N' Roses. Guns N' Roses is a metal band, right? No, more classic rock. Definitely one that deserves to be in the rock section. What about AC/DC? They're definitely a metal band. They have one of the best-selling metal records of all time. Them being in rock actually makes a little bit more sense. One thing I failed to explain in the last video is what some of the motivation should be for these sections. And that's the fact that some of the bigger bands may actually be better off in the rock section. That way it does get a little bit more, look from the casual passerby. Somebody who traditionally doesn't listen to hard rock, but likes AC/DC, for example, once Back in Black, finding it in the pop rock section actually helps them out a little bit. It's not a very good reason. It's more of a marketing reason. It's more of a business reason, which, of course, once again translates to it's not a good reason, but that's probably the reason. If I had a store, AC/DC would probably be in the metal section. That's a really rough call, though. It'd be one that I'd probably want to change almost every week based around how I felt. How about Evanescence? They're in the rock section, right? Yes, they are, and they belong there. Yeah, even though Evanescence is getting a lot of those heavy metal, ideas, and people are saying that they're a metal band, a lot of times Amy Lee, I'm sure, will be clamored for, where is she in the top 10 best female singers of heavy metal list. They're a rock band. They're a rock band. And really, Linkin Park was a group that, in the last video, we transformed from heavy metal over into the rock section. And that's where Evanescence is, and that's where they should stay. How about Manowar? They should be in the rock section, right? They're right where they should be in heavy metal. I don't know why that's even a debate. The fact that somebody asked me that is kind of crazy. As I Lay Dying and Killswitch Engage, they should be in the rock section, right? What? Yeah, I actually have gotten these. This is crazy. No, they totally 100% belong in the heavy metal section, just like August Burns Red is in the heavy metal section, right? They're in the rock section. It's Fringe line, that's all that I can say. A lot of Fringe line bands really suffer the fate that a lot of conventional stores really don't know where to put them. Usually one of the real hearkening calls that gets them into the rock section or sort of makes them lean toward that rock section as opposed to the metal section is whether or not they have some traction, whether it be on the radio or if there's a significant buzz. A lot of times I don't think these places actually stop and listen to the music and then try to make a judgment call. And plus, you have to remember that the idea of heavy metal, while there are some concrete details that sort of, nail a band down. I mean, Katy Perry's certainly not metal, but that's not a debate. But there are a couple of things that sort of give them that concrete edge. And August Burns Red is one that maybe might fulfill one or two of those, but may not fulfill all of them. So heavy metal, in a way, is kind of a subjective claim, I guess. It's, well, no, not really. It's actually more objective the further deeper down you go into. Whenever you talk about big businesses, oh boy. What about Breaking Benjamin? They belong in the metal section, right? They're fine in hard rock. How about Tool? They're definitely a metal band, right? Ooh, we're in that territory again of Fringe line, and considering they have a lot of support on the radio and stuff like that, more often than not, you're probably going to find this band in a rock section. And this is one I actually somewhat agree with. They were raised primarily with the alternative rock exterior. They had some prog that's thrown in there. Tool's kind of their own beast. Now, tons of metalheads love and respect Tool, which is probably why the clamor is for them to be over in the metal section. But if they're in the rock section in your local store, they're actually right where they probably ought to be. What about 3 Days Grace? Rock section? You're absolutely right. Once again, that's where that band should be, and that's where that band is presently. Now, if your store has them over in the metal section, then we would play the buzzer, but I'm going based off of my own experience and the placements in which those bands are at. If you're wondering what the shuffling is, I have a big-ass list. Man, oh man, it's a big-ass list. And we have to revisit, a couple of them from the last time, because there have been some new information that has kind of caused the decision to maybe change, or at least brought some new thought. Five Finger Death Punch and A7X were two bands that in the last video were deemed to be really warranting being in the heavy metal section. And A7X, I still agree with that. It's definitely a band that belongs there. Why they were in the pop rock section, I'll never quite understand. I'm thinking it's based off of that whole mainstream appeal Fringe line philosophy. The Five Finger Death Punch in the last video we said belongs in the metal section. Well, I'm reversing my thought process a little bit on that one. This one is so Fringe line at times, even though it has that real, in your face, I'm a big tough guy, big tough man philosophy. But there's a lot of root in rock there. There's a lot of root in classic rock there. You wouldn't put Foo Fighters in the heavy metal section, would you? No, you wouldn't. I just like having fun with this thing. No, the Foo Fighters definitely belong in the rock section, and that's exactly where they're at, so you don't have to worry about that. Don't lose any sleep over it. But what about Alice in Chains? Alice in Chains is a grunge band that has a lot of roots to hard rock, and some people even say is the heavy metal grunge band. Do they belong in the metal section? They're fine in pop rock. They're absolutely fine in the rock section because that is sort of where they belong. In fact, most of grunge is going to belong in the pop rock section, if not all of it. Now, there are some bands that people are going to argue even more fiercely about. We'll get to them. What about Rammstein? Rammstein is actually in the pop rock section. Is this designation correct? This is rough, but I'm going to have to say, no it isn't. Ministry is another band that kind of falls under this pretext. Does Ministry deserve to be in the heavy metal section? This thing has a mind of its own. I'm actually going to say that Ministry does belong over there, as well as Rammstein. It's kind of one of those deals where if you put one over there, I think you have to put both over there. But based off of that same element, Ministry is in the rock section, so I guess that means that Rammstein should also be in the rock section. Now, I think they should both go over to the metal section myself, but that's just me. Once again, it's 100% a personal opinion whenever it comes to some of these. It's a 100% personal opinion of what makes metal and what doesn't. There's going to be arguments about this until the end of time. That's just the reality of it. But what about a band like Stone Sour? Slipknot obviously deserves to be in the heavy metal section, correct? They do. Okay, but Stone Sour has a little bit more of a foundation in some hard rock music. Do they deserve to be over in the heavy metal section? I'm going to give this one to them. I think I am. Nah. I actually think that Stone Sour's over there more so for ease of location. They're a band that certainly falls a little bit within the vein, but I can understand. I guess what I'm saying is that I can understand people who argue that this band belongs more in a rock section than in a metal section. Myself personally, I kind of like the ease of discovery theory, considering Stone Sour is so close to Slipknot. It's very easy on the eye, but aside from that, from pure musical value, it's going to be a tough call, and I'd probably put them in the rock section. What about System of a Down? They're over in the rock section. Would I put them in the metal section? No, actually I wouldn't. I'd keep them exactly where they are. They're a very creative band, and while they do have some heavier property to them, I like the fact that they're in rock. It gives them a nice little window, sort of like window browsing appeal whenever somebody gets over to the S near to the T section. It's always fun to see people really sort of have their eyes bugged out whenever you see System of a Down followed up by the Talking Heads. Talking Heads belong in the metal section? Don't make me laugh. But at any rate, the Deftones. Now we're getting into hard ones. Now we're getting into real difficult ones. But this one, I think the Deftones belong in the metal section, and this is one that's a difficult build to make. Listen to their first couple of records, that raw aggression that you got on there, and then listen a little bit more to what they've become. The Deftones kind of embody a little bit of what metal is about, even though that's not really their intention. And this is really rough considering they're like a band like Tool. This is a group that gets a lot of that transitional fan base. So really, this is a situation where in either situation, the band kind of wins. So I would almost keep them in the rock section, considering that's where they've been forever. And if there's one thing that you kind of don't want to do is screw up what people know, considering you do that with a band such as A7X, which is something that happened in my store, and all of a sudden, everybody had no idea where they were. They moved from the rock section over into the heavy metal section, and all of a sudden, instead of looking over there, like smart, individual human beings, they thought that something happened. We weren't selling A7X anymore, and they were really, really mad at us, but until we showed them that they're just idiots. Yeah. So in some cases, the preconceived notions should almost remain preconceived, not based out of ignorance, but based out of ease of access. If you want to be able to sell these records to the fans, you kind of want to, keep them in a place where they know where they are. I guess it's a terrible, terrible argument. But as somebody who was in the business and who looks at the business very seriously, considering I would love to own such a business, those are tough calls that you sort of have to think about. What about Alter Bridge? Alter Bridge belongs in the metal section, right? Nah. Creed's over in the pop rock section, as well they should. And while Alter Bridge does have some great guitar solos and great formulaic makeup and things like that, they belong in the rock section. They're a terrific, terrific hard rock band. You wouldn't throw Led Zeppelin over in the metal section just because a couple handful of people say that they're metal because of their influence. Led Zeppelin was based around the blues. Led Zeppelin changed the face of classic rock. Led Zeppelin stays in the rock section. But what about progressive music? That's where we enter into one of our final really, really big debates. Progressive music is one where there's progressive metal and progressive rock, and you have progressive in both sections. Absolutely. In the last video, we said that Dream Theater belongs in the heavy metal section. Is this true of all of progressive metal? Well, once again, you're carrying that real chance of perhaps the band not even being seen. I would say with most of the stuff, you actually keep it in the rock section with only, a couple of rarefied exceptions. If it's any type of progressive death metal or something that does have growling vocals or a more aggressive edge to it, toss it in the metal section. Anything progressive rock, it's right there in the name. Porcupine Tree in the metal section? No. But Opeth in the heavy metal section? Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's kind of where the Fringe is. Now, I know that there are bands that don't, fulfill that cut and dry, kind of nice, neat setting like the two that we just mentioned. But at the same time, Opeth itself doesn't really follow that any longer, considering Heritage and Pale Communion have been a bit of a departure. Are you going to put those two in the rock section and throw the rest in metal? I wouldn't do that. That seems really silly. That's almost as silly as making a separate card for Metallica and Lou Reed for Lulu. In reality, what they should have done, and what was done in my store because I damn well made it happen, was that you put a copy of the album in each individual section, Metallica and Lou Reed. It actually gives it a bit of a, dual representative approach. Even though the album isn't all that great, it is still one that gets a lot more in the way of eye traffic. What about a band such as Godsmack, that embodies a lot of hard rock principle, but is extremely heavy, especially whenever you take a look at their first album? Metal or rock? I'd probably keep them in the rock section. Godsmack has been a band that's been in the rock section ever since they first came out, and it goes back to that old idea that if you take it out of where people know that it's at and into a brand new place, it's going to cause confusion. I would keep Godsmack in the rock section, but I will also admit at the same time that the band has some heavy riffs. The band, their first album is very, very good. I'm a big fan of it. I've owned it ever since it came out, and they're a band that's certainly a bit on the fringe line. It's kind of weird considering we threw Disturbed over into the metal section, but yet Godsmack is staying behind in the rock section. They've really proven, though, during the more recent stretch of their career, that they have a little bit more of that hard rock orientation. They just represent it heavy as fuck. So there's two final bands that we need to talk about that are definitely the sort of bona fide definition of fringe line in the eyes of many people. One of which is true, the other of which is just lunacy. And the first one, we have to talk about them, especially considering the tragic death of Lemmy this past December. Motörhead. They're traditionally found in the heavy metal section. Is this where they belong? Yes, it is. While these guys have a rock background, and while their music doesn't exactly echo and scream heavy metal to, perhaps the people of today that are used to bands such as Obscura, either that or even some of the newer age bands such as Attila or Emmure, Motörhead is seen as one of the bigger foundations of heavy metal, so you do keep them over there as thus. It's not something where as a band becomes a little bit more, elder and the tones of today get heavier and heavier that you necessarily abandon the core philosophy. So Black Sabbath isn't going to move over to the pop rock section based off of the fact that their sound is getting older and is taking a little bit more of that classic rock idealism. Some stores have actually done that. They're wrong. Blue Cheer, Deep Purple, bands of that variety that have only painted as sort of an influence as opposed to truly being a true heavy metal product, I guess, those are ones where you would probably keep them over in the rock section. Most of them are present there anyhow. Motörhead has always been usually within the heavy metal confines, so I would keep that there. Because let me tell you, if you take them out and throw them over into the pop rock section, I guarantee you're going to encounter a lot more pissed off fans than people that accept it. But that brings us to the final one that I get way too often, which I don't even understand why I get it all that often. Nirvana belongs in the metal section. What fucking dope are you smoking? I know that yesterday was 420, but are you fucking kidding me? Nirvana, like Alice in Chains, grunge band. Alice in Chains was actually more metal than Nirvana. Alice in Chains, rock section. Nirvana should be in metal section? No. Someone was even saying to me, why isn't Nirvana on one of the most overrated metal albums of all time list? It wasn't on there because it's not a metal album. It's never been a metal album, and it's never going to be a metal album. Hopefully this has cleared up some of the strange things that we see at stores whenever it comes to the placement of some hard rock or some heavy metal bands. I'm going to leave a link to the first video in the comments, or the description box rather, below. I always screw that up. Maybe it belongs in its own section. I don't know. I'm coverkillernation, and if there are other groups that you're wondering about, post them in the comments below. This in itself is a sequel, but I can always make it into a trilogy. It's not like I haven't done that before. So, coverkillernation, I'll talk to you guys later.